Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this roundtable on BRICS Plus as a development platform, sectoral cooperation, and NDB's role. I'm Fabio Tomazella, PhD student in international law at the University of São Paulo and researcher at BRICS. Development remains one of the greatest challenges for the Global South. Most countries still face deep infrastructure gaps, unsustainable external debts, and trade distortions caused by agricultural subsidies, especially in rich countries. Moreover, the climate crisis demands solutions that promote resilience and sustainability. In this context, BRICS emerges as an alternative model of development, one that seeks not to reproduce the traditional core-periphery relations, but to build a multipolar international order and a more equitable international system, supported by its own financial institution, the New Development Bank, NDB. So to assess the challenges and opportunities of this new development architecture, I am pleased to introduce our speakers, Ellen Bueno, Samuel Spellman, Rafaela Sá, Tainá Pereira, and Vivian Rocha. Before we start, please note that the attendance list will be posted in the comment section. After each presentation, we will select a few questions from the audience to address to the speaker. Our first speaker is Ellen Bueno, PhD in International Law at the University of São Paulo and member of BRICS. Thank you, Ellen. Please go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Agora sim.
Okay. Sorry about that. So can you see my screen? I'm not sure if... No, I think it's not working. Sorry about that. I tried to share my screen again. Okay, sure. Yes, now I think it's working. Okay, can you see my screen now? Yeah, I think it's working. Okay, so thank you very much, Fabio. Sorry about that. So it's an honor to be here today, so participate in this roundtable discussion alongside esteemed colleagues and accomplished professionals. In my presentation today, I would like to share insights on the New Development Bank and its role in climate finance. So let me start with the introduction here. So the climate crisis is leading to significant environmental degradation, social instability, and economic challenge across all continents, and posing major obstacles to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. So people in developing countries contribute the least to greenhouse gas emission, but are hit hardest by climate change due to both higher exposure to its impacts and limited state support, financial resources, and social safety nets to prevent, cope with, or adapt to these challenges. So developing countries, which are among the most vulnerable to climate change, they face risks that require international support for both mitigation and adaptation efforts, in particular because they also face severe debts, limiting their fiscal capacity and hampering efforts to build climate resilience. So inequalities in the international financial system hinder efforts to meet the rising need for climate adaptation. And despite global climate finance that has doubled over the past decade, it remains far short of what is needed. So in order to have an idea, studies suggest at least 4.3 trillion US dollar in annual financing by 2030 to prevent the worst impact of climate change. So facing obstacles to funding, developing countries rely heavily on international funds and multilateral development banks, so NDBs, to support climate mitigation and adaptation programs. So since the Paris Agreement, NDBs adopt an approach that address the linked challenge between sustainable development and climate change. Here, just a quick demonstration, some examples of how NDBs are implementing climate-specific projects. So the World Bank Group, for instance, was one of the first multilateral development bank to finance climate-specific projects. So the bank has its climate action plans, the current one, 2021, 2025, which emphasize renewable energy, sustainable city, food security, among other issues. And we have here also some other examples, such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which updated its energy sector strategy in 2022 in order to align with the Paris Agreement. Also, the IDB, that since the Paris Agreement has provided over $20 billion in climate finance, and also started its program to integrate biodiversity into its operation. And other examples, such as the European Investment Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the African Development Bank, which each of these banks, they have its own climate adaptation plan, or in case of the African Development Bank, the Department of Climate Change and Green Growth Initiative. Let me go to... And also in 2023, the multilateral development banks collectively commit to over $108 billion in climate finance. So they agreed to establish a unified framework for reporting climate impacts and results, which aims to improve collaboration, such as private sector engagement, to enhance climate and development actions. However, despite these several efforts made and the crucial role of NDBs in climate finance, experts argue that additional investments and reforms are necessary to effectively address the impact of climate change and achieve the sustainable development goals. Sorry. Okay. So I study on climate finance from various NDBs conducting between 2015 and 2020 revealed that the imbalance between funding for mitigation and adaptation could hinder the goals of the Paris Agreement. So the study found that a significant portion of climate funds from NDBs is directly towards high emission countries, with very little support allocated to those most vulnerable to climate risks. And according to other study here, MDBs, also in addition to catalyzing much higher levels of climate financing must also strongly support the expansion of public investment in adaptation and just transition. So to this end, they need to reform their strategies and operational activities in order, for instance, to intensify engagement to support countries in formulating effective development and climate strategy and plans. So in this context, I would like to explore how the New Development Bank is tackling the crucial issue of climate finance. So the bank has recognized since it's the beginning of its operation the importance of upholding policy and operational standards that promote sustainable development. And additionally, it has emphasized its commitment to promoting mitigation and adaptation measures to combat the climate emergency. So under its general strategy, the current one, 2022-2026, the NDB has committed to helping its members achieving their development objectives in line with the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. So the New Development Bank has pledged to allocate the 40% of its total approved financing to projects that contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation. And in order to have an idea, by 2021, the majority of the bank activities were focused on promoting sustainable development goals, with focus on SDG 9, so industry, innovation, and infrastructure, followed by SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, and SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. So what are the challenges and limitations of the New Development Bank in terms of climate finance? The bank is dedicated to supporting the SDG and actively has incorporating some of these principles into its infrastructure project. And this includes a focus on sustainable urban development and improving access to essential services. However, there remains a notable lack of emphasis on critical areas such as gender equality, the conservation of ecosystems, environmental protection efforts. So addressing these gaps, it's also essential to ensure a holistic approach to sustainability and social equity in all its initiatives. So in terms of climate commitment, the bank is also facing some limitations. So only 30% of the approved and ongoing projects of the bank are allocated to the clean energy and energy efficiency sector. So in the recent years, the bank has directed a significant portion of its project towards the transport and infrastructure sector. I think that the main issue and limitation of the bank is that with 43% of all approved projects in the transport and infrastructure sector, there are some concerns about the effectiveness of the New Development Bank commitment to sustainability and environmental preservation and climate mitigation and adaptation, because transport-related projects we know they are important in order to achieve SDG Goal 9, for instance, so industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And it's also linked to SDG 1, or poverty, or SDG 10, so reducing inequality, because, for instance, improve rural roads which can reduce poverty by creating new jobs and increase income. However, depending on the specific type of transport project, this initiative can also lead to negative impacts. So this includes biodiversity loss, the displacement of local population, and increased greenhouse gas emissions. So the transport sector is still heavily reliant on fossil fuels. It's, as we know, is one of the largest contributors to urban and regional air pollution. accounting from 25% of global GHG emission. And so this poses a significant challenge to achieving the emission reduction target of the Paris Agreement. So balance the goal of the 2030 agenda with those of the Paris Agreement presents an ongoing challenge for the bank, particularly due to its substantial investment in transport. So regarding climate mitigation and adaptation, the Paris Agreement emphasizes the need for a balanced allocation of resources for both, and however, the NDB portfolio reveals a significant imbalance with limited focus on adaptation projects. So the low priority given to adaptation project by the NDB underscores the lack of an effective climate action plan that addresses both SDG and the Paris Agreement simultaneously. And additionally, the focus on transport and infrastructure projects suggests a development agenda approach that has not fully, how can I say, adapted to the challenges of our century, 21st century, especially regarding the negative impacts of climate emergency on developing countries. So there is an urgent need to incorporate specific thematic areas into its portfolio. And therefore, I would like to emphasize that it's an imperative for NDBs and in particular for the new development bank to accelerate a climate-focused finance agenda that address both mitigation and adaptation, because without proper adaptation strategies, these challenges become more expensive and difficult to manage, particularly in developing countries that are the most vulnerable due to their locations, climate conditions, and reliance on specific resources. So according to the UNEP Adaptation Gap Report 2023, adaptation efforts can enhance resilience, especially among vulnerable groups who are disproportionately affected by climate change. So adaptation efforts are necessary in areas such as agriculture, resilience technology. That's very quickly I would like to also to emphasize here. So yeah, sustainability, okay. I'm sorry about that. Regarding the investments in terms of agriculture resilience technology, this issue is also important because in the context of BRICS, the impact of climate change on agriculture and on food system is critical for all this countries, because Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, they are responsible for 1/3 of the world's food production. So while their agriculture sector significantly contribute to greenhouse gas emission, they are also extremely vulnerable to climate impact. So increasing frequency of extreme weather events can affect productivity, food prices, and food security. So therefore, it's important to invest in adaptation because it's essential for improved rural livelihoods and supporting process that lead to more equitable and sustainable food systems. So a strong climate action plan for the new development bank should include priority adaptation measures, target the agri-food system of developing countries. And this plan should also strengthen critical infrastructure resilience, including, for instance, the management of climate resilience water resources. And finally, the last but not least important here, it's biodiversity, because biodiversity represents another a crucial dimension of this landscape. The BRICS are home to some of the world's richest biodiversity. So Brazil, as you know, contains the largest tropical forest, and South Africa, India, China, and Indonesia rank among the top biodiversity rich nations. And Russia, for instance, has about 20% of the world's forest resources. So biodiversity is vital for sustaining all forms of life on Earth, supporting food and water security, and providing climate resilience. So in terms of financing and biodiversity, developing countries, they face additional challenges in protecting biodiversity, such as population growth and limited finance resources. So these nations often rely on international financing to achieve SDG, the Paris Agreement, and also the Convention on Biological Diversity. And despite increased biodiversity funding over the past decade, it still represents less than 1% of the global GDP. So given this challenge, the New Development Bank should also integrate specific biodiversity policies into its climate action plan. And the bank should establish dedicated biodiversity funds to protect ecosystem and promote sustainable land and water use. Finally, my conclusion here. So the limited integration of the SDG and the Paris Agreement remains still a significant obstacle to timely implementation of both agenda. So achieving these goals requires a profound transformation in the operations of states and multilateral development banks, particularly concerning sustainable development financing and climate policy. And despite initial commitments to fund no infrastructure sustainability projects, such as those addressing climate change and resource conservation and biodiversity, the progress has been limited. So in addition, unlike other multilateral development banks, the New Development Bank has not established a specific climate policy or has not updated its environmental and social framework to meet international commitments. So to improve its impact, the bank should balance mitigation and adaptation in its project, also increasing investments in the sector of clean energy, and prioritize adaptation initiatives, including, for instance, reforestation and agriculture resilience, and also integrating biodiversity and natural capital in its operation. Finally, sorry about.
Fábio, eu acho que eu vou alguma coisa.
Yeah. Just a second. It's gonna restart in a couple of minutes, I guess.
Fabio, may I go ahead with my presentation
Yeah, okay.
because of the consultation that I have?
Okay. So now
Okay.
we have Samuel Spellman, professor at Federal University of Pará. You may start your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fabio. Okay, so I'll just put on my screen my presentation, and you tell me if it's working. Okay? Can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, good morning, good evening to everyone who's watching us. My name is Samuel Spellman. I am with the Center of China and Global Studies at the Pontifical Catholic University of Minas Gerais. Right now, I'm in the process of awaiting basically public selection here at the Federal University of Pará. And my presentation is regarding the challenges to multilateral development finance and the development of global climatic change. Okay. Here's if anyone's wants, here's the QR code to my LinkedIn, but you can just search for Samuel Spellman there. So, okay. Generally speaking, where are we right now? We are at there's a historical development base which enabled the global financial system to develop, uh, to create a series of development banks, first based on the United States as a consequence of the Second World War, and eventually all the development nations, all the developed nations started to creating themselves their own multilateral development banks. So we had the European Reconstruction Bank, we had eventually the Inter-American Bank, and we also had obviously the Asian Development Bank with Japan. But eventually, during that crisis of 1980s and 1990s, what we learned was that the American economy swallowed back all the dollars that were transitioning at the multilateral, at the international economy. So during that time, there was a drought of multilateral finance at the global level, and emergent new donors started appearing. First, there were private companies giving far less than what the WMF used to give anyway, and the International Multilateral Fund swallowed their previously large options which they had to offer. So there was an ideological change that we call new liberalism within capitalism. Eventually, we got to the new donors. There was a reaction from especially the BRICS countries, the BRICS economies, during the late 90s, early 2000s, that enabled the historical progress to take a shape as a collective force. And in this collective force, as a reaction to the 2008 financial crisis, eventually this process led to the creation of the new development bank. So from this general outlook of the last 75 years, what we can learn, 75 to 80 years, what we can learn is that we are at a crossroads in the development history. Because multilateral finance should address the emerging problems regarding the climate change. Otherwise, this wouldn't have been recognized already by multilateral banks all across the world. There was this pact signed by almost all development banks 3 to 4 years ago. And the portfolios started to enact a sudden change in the direction of green finance. The real question is if this change is equitable, is right, and it's also addressing the problems that we have. So there's an explicit limitation with that. And I tell you that because not always transportation is ungreen, but mainly it may be. But transportation can be green sometimes. Can have depending on the metrics, the main matrix of the electricity production. So there is a contradiction right there. There's also a contradiction with finance development because sometimes it may, and as we will see, appear as green, but sometimes it is not. It's because we are naming the projects approved by the multilateral banks with names that remind us of green development, or names like vulnerability or things like that. But are they though responding to these issues effectively? And that may be the challenge to many new initiatives that we are facing in multilateral finance. So this is what I call a sectorial approach, and I will be present in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The generalities of the bank is that the bank has a pretty successful history of enabling new projects and a continuous path towards the evolution of the practices that a multilateral bank has to have. But the challenge is the effectability. The challenge is to set policy that is directly apart from the World Bank, because there's a larger shelf of collaboration with the World Bank. But what is the pathway that we are walking with them? So that there is also this tension right there. But there is also room for collaboration and win-win strategies regarding multilateral banks. So the engagement with other institutions we'll be watching pretty close by in the next slide. But what I want to say is that this is a bank that is used to collaborate with both the Asian Development Bank, which is headed by Japan, and also with from the five institutions that are represented by the World Bank. It collaborates usually with 3 or up to 4 actually. And this tells us that there is maybe a test case scenario a bit different from the new development bank, but also a test case that represents maybe a different kind of policy for a different kind of environment. And we should look forward to maybe putting a microscope on this kind of experiences in order to further learn from that. There's also a global agenda, because this responds to the cities that will be hosting not only the COP30. This behind me right now is Belém, Pará, city where I live, and the city where I built a house on, but also it should respond to people's needs, right? So looking forward, what can we learn from the BRICS Plus engagement to the COP30 and to multilateral finance? This here is the action as the spread out of the AEB. You can see that some regions of the world became parts of the AEB later on, like Latin America, for instance, but also North Africa and Papua New Guinea right there. You see there's a steady evolution over the years. You can see that the first 5 years we had a quicker engagement with the bank, and this other new countries came later. So Latin America almost in every case came after 2020 to the bank, even though Brazil was invited as a founding member back in 2015. And you can see that there is also an effectability of, in other words, being effective, that this bank has, that maybe sometimes it is named as lacking on the NDB, but the NDB is testing another approach to multilateral finance. So there's also this political limitation. The NDB is testing what I think that sometimes people don't have the guts to test, which is the detachment from the dollar. The EEB is not. So there is also this presence, this constant presence of a meaningful but not commanding part of the developed world. So you see the Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Italy are important partners of the EEB. And Asiatic as well. When we think about Asia Pacific, so you see Australia, Republic of Korea right there, and also on other BRICS economies. So you see Saudi Arabia, Indonesia. Okay, so here are the projects. Okay, here's where we get the projects. But it mainly follows a developed path. The main part of the projects are either co-financed or are also mainly financed exclusively through the bank. Okay, so you see that there's a larger part here at the 100%. This is almost like 130 projects. And the other parts are almost the same. So you see that there's a dominance here. Sometimes the bank tests paying the projects by themselves, restricted to up to $500 million. And sometimes the bank experiments co-financing, especially during times of need. And we'll be looking at some study cases here. Okay. This is also the challenge. As said by my colleague, Ellen Bueno, there is a huge challenge to respond to the climatic emergency. So the development and the limitations of financing are increasing. Okay. While the developed banks, the developing multilateral banks are also facing challenges. So this is a chart that it responds to the COVID emergency. What one sees that the EIB in 2020 rather quickly responded by creating a specific, directed, targeted subdivision that responded to the COVID crisis by enabling a faster track of approval for multilateral finance. And so this fast tracking approval enabled them to put forward more money and to approve more projects. And this responded to the crisis, especially in 2020 and 2021. This is also distributed in a certain way that one sees right here. One sees that it was obviously responding to each country. So you had three main sectors: public health, economic resilience, and financial liquidity. Economic resilience was mainly targeted at company recovery after the COVID emergency. And financial liquidity was mainly directed at central banks in order to keep the balance of payments afloat across Asia. So you see that public health mainly dominates the first from 2020 to 2022 the agenda, but eventually economic resilience within this the sectorial approach started to take a larger share of engagement. Here you can see the full picture of corporation, because within these projects that were co-financed during the COVID emergency, one sees that the AEB share is the bluer part of the screen, the left-hand side. But the other side is mainly paid equally by other banks. So you have the collaborations with the Asian Development Bank, you have collaborations with the World Bank, you have collaborations with the Development Bank of Germany, and etc. And also with obviously with local governments. So we will sometimes have collaborations with provinces of India, for instance, or China, and you also have collaborations with rather smaller countries. So within this framework, what can we see? We can see the dimension of the challenge, and with this, I will start to finish my presentation. The kind of financing that we are looking forward, and the and the needs of global development
Sorry,
have
Sam.
to. Wait,
It's frozen.
2 minutes.
It's frozen in the
Ah,
first.
it's frozen.
Yeah.
Why didn't you say, man, that, man? You should have told me before. I was showing charts. Okay, give me a minute, okay?
Okay.
Can you see this chart?
No. Yes.
No?
Yes.
Okay, so this was the one of, can you see that this is different chart now?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the evolution of health and the differences between segments.
Okay.
This
Yeah.
is the collaboration chart,
Okay.
and this is the COVID response chart. Okay, this one is actually the one that I wanted to mention, because within the framework of responding to the global climatic needs, the banks started to approve more and more financing towards green development. But what you should look out for is that if this case-by-case scenario, if these approvals are actually being directed towards actual green development, and not just finance as everyday life. Because after the agreement between the multilateral banks by late 2022, you can always see the words transition, sustainable, renewable resources, sustainability, or green within almost all projects approved. But that may not or may indicate a pattern, discursive pattern. Okay? So to put forward my final considerations, there are possibilities for engagement, and multilateral credit in the future, it may be the key to opening new sources for further engagement between multilateral finance institutions. But that also may need a new pattern of credit concession, one that analyzes better this kind of issues, so that we better implement solutions directed case by case scenarios, and that we also avoid developing certain sectors, such as even oil and gas production, that may see unnecessary or may see green, but eventually maybe put forward as means of productions that would then help out the development of green finance. So that there is this duality in development, right? Well, that being said, Brazil does not engage that much in the EIB. Brazil has chosen a path towards further engagement with the new development bank. But there is an interesting story behind this, and is maybe a story towards the future, a story of engagement towards the future. So that being said, I would like to thank you all for listening to me, for taking your time. Okay, it was great to have you here. And here's my LinkedIn again, so I can take questions there. And then I would like to also say I'm very sorry to the other panelists, because I have to leave in a couple minutes. Okay, but thank you all.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you so much for your presentation. Now we are gonna see if there are some questions. Is it possible for a bank focused on infrastructure to become a genuine engine of ecological transition? Or is there an inherent tension between building more and emitting less? That's the question.
It's a good question. Depends on the bank, depends on the case, but I believe any bank can start a subsector devoted to this kind of approach that may be meaningful towards approving certain kind of projects, especially regarding development growth and also green energy and also other sectors related, but they may need special agendas.
Okay, thank you so much, Samuel. Now our next speaker is Rafaela Sá. Rafaela is a PhD student in political science, international relations at McMaster University in Canada, and researcher at the Center for the Study of BRICS countries at Fluminense Federal University. Thank you, Rafaela. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Are you able to see my screen, my presentation? Okay, let me try. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Rafaela. I'm a second-year PhD student in political science, international relations at McMaster in Canada, and also researching in the BRICS in Brazil, and also in the public banking project in Canada. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to share the panel with good friends and research colleagues here from long time. And today I will discuss the role of multilateral development bank in reducing the cost of capital in the climate finance, particularly looking to the new development bank as a case study. So my presentation is divided in 3 parts. So first, I will briefly discuss the climate finance debate and regarding socially just green transitions. And then I will highlight the relevance of the public banks, particularly the multilateral development banks, in reducing the cost of capital for the global south specifically. And I will argue that the multilateral development banks can reduce the cost of capital in 2 ways. So first, they can engage in public-public collaborations with national and subnational development banks, and also they can lend in local currencies. So after presenting this general framework of the argument, I will focus on the case of the new development bank, which employs both strategies. So they are executing those 2 strategies. Okay, so regarding climate finance, one of the main concerns in the discussion of political economy of climate change is related to the ways that green transition can be funded, can be financed, right? So there are 2 options. So there are private options and public mechanisms that can raise capital towards low carbon investments. However, private instruments face multiple barriers, including limited incentives and short-term profit orientations. So in contrast, we have a lot of public institutions, mainly public banks, that has the potential to lead the green transition efforts, since they account for combined assets of $91 trillion, and they are not essentially a profit-driven actor. So they have a good potential to lead those agendas. In the COP29 in Baku last year, it was presented a collective climate finance target of 300 billion a year by 2035, only to developing countries. So this is like a global target. It will probably be updated or discussed in Brazil in COP30. But let's see how it's gonna be. But this is the current target. But however, the growing demand for green transition, it's however hindered by insufficient financing for those who needed it most. So those in the global south that facing the severe consequences and impacts of climate change. So the emerging economies and developing countries' access to this finance has been limited, especially because of the financial structure, which is make the cost of capital very high for them. So the cost of capital can be the main barrier for the climate finance in those countries. And the cost of capital can be understood basically as the interest rate on the borrowing. So it's the amount of money that a country needs to pay to return the financing projects when they get a lending project. So this cost has been rising globally, and it can bring like severe consequences for countries in the global south, especially increasing their already significant debt burden. So addressing better conditions for the cost of capital towards climate investment, it's a key driver to accelerate the green transition, especially to the global south. And in this presentation, I'm showing that the multilateral development banks are well positioned and has the potential to address this barrier and even support the global decarbonization process. Okay, so like going deep on the role of multilateral development banks, I see that the relevance of these developing financial institutions has been stated in many multilateral spheres, particularly in the recent Seville commitment. And so those multilateral institutions have a specific business model that has a potential to reduce the cost of climate finance. So they have first a broad international engagement, they have a global expertise, and they have also the capacity for large-scale investments. But the main feature of NDBs in this regard is that these institutions borrow resources from a risk-averse investors to fund projects that have a long-term social benefits. It means that the interest rate, the costs, are not so expensive. So to maintain these conditions, these public institutions have to follow the financial rules, the financial market rules, right? And they have to keep their AAA credit ratings. And keeping these high crediting ratings, these institutions are able to raise funds at a lower cost, and it enabled the members to access the capital in a cheaper financing structure. So this is a lower interest rate for the members. However, the global south economies suffer from the two main barriers in relation to access climate finance. First, they face a significant credit risk. So, like all the countries have, like the majority of developing countries have like a higher credit risk, which make the interest rate very high, and they also face non-favorable currency strength. So this also make some vulnerabilities in exchange rate. So in the sense, I would argue in this presentation that the NDB is critical, like the multilateral development banks are critical and important for dealing with these both barriers. So first, they can reduce the cost of capital through what we can call public-public collaborations. And also they can lower the costs by lending in local currency. So regarding like the PPCs, the public-public collaborations, I would say that the NDBs can access financial resources from their shareholders, their state members, and also from bonds in the capital market with a strong credit rate. So it makes a cheaper structure of cost for them. And the NDBs so can implement partnerships with domestic and subnational public banks in the global south. And this can have like a cheaper cost structure for them. So the NDB can help to reduce the cost for those countries in fostering those partnerships. And this can, in consequence, incentivize and scale up the financing for green transition. I will show a little bit more about like concrete cases, but going for the second idea, so about the NDBs reducing the cost using local currency, it is another strategy which is important here. So these countries, these institutions can use local currency for the lending, and this can help them because emerging economies face a challenge of because they have weaker currency strength in the financial market, and the traditional climate finance mechanisms don't quite account for this exchange rate risk that it might involve in the long-term transaction. So to reduce the risk of debt distress, the NDB can have the possibility to lend in their members' local currency. So it can decrease the risk of vulnerabilities, mainly because it avoids repayment in a foreign currency. And it can also contribute to development a local currency bond market, which is also important for the currency strength. Now going deep in the New Development Bank. So when I was investigating these public-public collaborations for the first time, I discovered that the New Development Bank is the largest MDB providing climate-related finance to national development banks. So in terms of volume. So this is a very interesting data, and so we can see that the New Development Bank serves as a relevant example to analyze these PPCs, these public-public collaborations. Additionally, the NDB, it's also a good example regarding local currency, because the institution it's known for encouraging the use of local currency since the beginning, since the foundation, right? So one of the institution practices implemented by the bank, it's aiming to diversify their financial resources and use their members' local currency. So we can see NDB as a great study case for both those strategies. So now going deep, like on the New Development Bank specifically and the NDB dynamics. So the bank was established in 2014, and the bank began its operation in the next year. It is headquartered in Shanghai, but also have regional offices in other regions, in all of the member countries' regions. And then the NDB the main goal is to finance infrastructure and sustainable development projects, not only for BRICS countries, but also to emerging economies and developing countries in general. And the bank is marked or a feature for specific characteristics. So first, the culturing system. So the bank differentiate from others MDBs because they use local regulations to evaluate impact in project implementation. It needs to be reflected, this feature, because especially considering national environmental regulations, which can be problematic in some cases. So this can be a good thing or also have some problematic elements. The second feature is about the new NDB governance. So it has been based on equality and democratic mandates, at least before the admission of new members. So before that, all the founding members had the same amount of voting quotas. Beyond the 5 initial members, NDB now have 4 new official countries, so Bangladesh, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Algeria, and 3 new prospective members, so Uruguay, Uzbekistan, and Colombia. So these 3 are waiting for domestic approval to get in the institution. And finally, the bank aims also to increase its use of local currency in their lending, as I mentioned before. So now I will show some data regarding the NDB portfolio. Going for the data on the NDB operations, for this research, I tried to examine both public-public collaborations and the use of local currency in NDB's operation. So the first graphic here represents the analysis of the partnerships between the NDB and the Brazilian national and subnational institutions. And I focus on Brazil because Brazil is the country with most the number of partnerships with national and subnational institutions. So considering the Brazilian context only, from 2016 and 2024, 8 projects were lending to national and subnational financial institutions in a total of 31 projects. So it's a very important amount of projects in this category of public-public collaborations. So since the beginning, the NDB has actively pursued those type of partnership with the national institutions. And a notable example is the first project of approval to Brazil in 2016, which involved a financing with the Brazilian Development Bank, the BNDES, to support clean energy initiatives. And the majority of those projects here in the graphic, it's also related to sustainable infrastructure. With one exception, that was only one project for COVID-19, but all the others are related to green transitions. And one point of attention as well, I think regarding as well Ellen presentation here, understanding the limits or the debates on the NDB. So concerning the social environment governance, the NDB presents that when we have this type of partnership, the intermediary institution, in the case the BNDES, for example, is the agents responsible for assessing and monitoring the environmental impacts. So this can be a little bit problematic considering the national legislation and the role of NDB in monitoring those projects as well. Okay, so going forward to the currency, the local currencies, the figure here shows the amount of capital by currency in the NDB portfolio. And although the financing dominates in the US dollar, it is still very predominant. It's possible to start see a diversification, especially with the Chinese yuan, renminbi, and also the South Africa rand, which are like both currencies from the NDB member countries. This data demonstrates that Brazil and Russia are the only founding members that don't have any like project financing in their own local currency. Brazil have projects in renminbi, but not in Brazilian real. So it's important, maybe a limit for us to explore. Regarding the capital and raising funds on the financial market, the graphic here shows the NDB issuance of bonds in the local market, especially in China and South Africa. So some of these issuances are green bonds, and it's aimed to low carbon economy. And we have bonds in renminbi and in in rand beyond the dollars. So hence, like it's important to see the increasing use of local currency and the raising funds on the local financial market being like important strategies for the new development bank, especially understanding they can scale up the financing of green transitions and also not make it worse the debt distress of those countries. So just to conclude, after examining the NDB case, I would conclude that the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, are at the forefront of climate finance, especially because they have the potential to address financial barriers to green transitions in the two fronts. So first, they can improve the access to funding by MDBs partnering with national institutions in a cheaper cost structure, and also by mitigating debt and currency risks by using local currency. So the new development bank has been executing both strategies with some limits, but we can see a very important potential. And just to conclude, I would conclude by saying that the relevance of this public banks cooperation, the public collaborations, and the use of local currency were both highlighted during Lula's and Dilma's speeches during the BRICS summit in Rio this year. So which only emphasized the relevance of those strategies for the bank. So thank you.
Thank you, Rafaela, for your excellent presentation. So we are checking the questions. I'd like to ask you, so you see NDB as an effective tool for an alternative economic order, multipolarization, even if they use the same credit ratings as Western institutions or the same patterns of financing? I mean, the rules have to be similar. How do you see this criticism?
Yeah, well, it's an excellent question. It's a very difficult one too, because I think it's difficult to say yes or no. I think it depends. It depends on which feature or which dimension we are understanding. So I see that the new development bank has some potential to change the structure, or maybe to introduce some innovations that can in the future make some interesting impacts on the global south. But however, there's problems, and it's difficult for the bank continue like change the whole structure in within the capitalist structure, right? This international order that it's based on the credit rating, the financial market rules. It's very difficult for them to be autonomous in the sense that can only focus on the global south like problems and issues, because they are like immersed in those dynamics, right? So we can discuss this further, but this is something I'm reflecting a lot on my PhD research as well, because I'm trying to look the potential for NDB in the global south, for Brazil, for example, but there are sometimes some limits, especially like regarding the environmental and social impacts, and also other problems that we can highlight in the debate. But thank you so much for this question, and we can continue the discussion later.
Okay. And also the asymmetry with China and the group that
Yeah.
is dominant. Okay, thank you so much, Rafael. So our fourth speaker is Tainá Pereira, a PhD student of International Political Economy at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and researcher at BRICS. Thank you, Tainá. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Let me try to share my screen with you. Just a second. Let me see. Okay. Here it goes. Can you see it?
Yes.
Fine. Try to amplify. And there it goes. Okay, so I'd like to start thanking Fabio for the invitation to participate in this panel. Also, many thanks to BRICS partners in the realization of our 19th BRICS conference. And last but not least, thank to our audience, and not only for being here with us today, but for attending all the other panels since Monday. It's very interesting to have our colleagues here to discuss such an important subject, and particularly the theme of this roundtable, BRICS Plus as a development platform, sectoral cooperation, and the role of the NDB. I think it addresses very well the general thematic of this conference this year. Now I would like to go deep in the Development Bank strategic role, and connecting with our previous panel earlier today. I would like to talk more about the de-dollarization agenda that includes the local currency bonds and loans, but not only this. There are many interesting things happening now inside the BRICS, and these things are deeply connected with the new development bank. So let's see. And first, regarding NDB roots, it's interesting to note that when the Indians presented the proposal of the NDB back in 2012, there was this official narrative about creating something that would help BRICS countries to address their specific needs on terms of infrastructure and investment. And what we can see now is that NDB was far more than that, was a real strategic response to the global north international financial architecture dominance. When the NDB was announced in 2014, the official narrative said that it was due to the inadequacy and the slow pace of the reform in the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. You remember that the BRICS had an accordance on the IMF quotas, and they also presented to the World Bank shared demand on more investments in infrastructure. It took years to happen, and it was not really how the BRICS group demanded collectively. So not all BRICS countries were happy with the reforms. And this is pretty much why the NDB was launched along with the CRA. And now we can see a very explicit mandate in seeking greater financing local currencies, because it's pretty clear to the BRICS as a group, as a platform, that these reforms that they are seeking since 2007 are not going to happen as they expected. And this vision has strengthened with the promise and have accelerated during the last Kazan summit last year. So at a glance, I will not repeat the information about the NDB. Rafaela has already made that brilliantly. I would like to stress the point about the goal of reaching 30% of its financing in local currency by the end of 2026. It's a very ambitious goal, and the pace in which NDB is achieving that is pretty interesting to observe. As much as the whole NDB process, it's pretty fast for a new institution, for an institution that is raised and controlled completely by global South countries. So in 2024, we had around 20% of the NDB loans issued in national currencies, and now we are close to 25% and working to achieve 30% by next year. This is a very interesting plan, and it explicitly solidifies NDB as the main institutional vehicle for the BRICS de-dollarization agenda. And this is crucial to understand because it's a political agenda, as Samuel very well noted. It's not common among other NDBs around the world. And there is an important aspect in this agenda of the dollarization. One is that the branch of the loans, the access of the loans is not the most important one. We see that eliminating currency mismatch using loans, it helps to make that more sustainable. It helps to make the finance cheaper, but it's not enough to make the local currencies stronger and also and actually enable the BRICS countries to have like more policy space to invest and to fund what they really want and they really need. So local market bond issuance are a crucial point in this strategy because it happens to strengthen the liquidity of the currencies themselves and to tap to the capital markets inside the BRICS countries. Going forward, when we look at the general strategy of the NDB, it is more than ever proposal of being a global South bank to global South. So it's a much more ambitious initiative than AIIB, for example, and many other regional and multilateral development banks. And it's crucially emphasizing the need of building a multipolar financial architecture to reduce the dominance of a single currency. And this currency, of course, is the US dollar. So the expression to new members, it has to do, of course, with the general mandate of the NDB, but it has also to do with this need of creating new markets for local currencies in order to achieve cheaper prices for these currencies so they can finance their projects in their own currencies. In Kazan, what we see is more, how can I say, practical path towards these goals with the launch of the BRICS multilateral guarantees, which is an initiative to use multilateral guarantees to leverage private capital. So again, we are talking about markets and how to make private resources to flow into NDB's capital to fund the project they want. And guarantees are very effective. We have the example of MIDA inside the World Bank. One point is that it took years to be established back in 1970s, and we do not have this time now. Not only because of the climate crisis, but because the BRICS countries are facing the effects of the weaponization of the dollar, as you saw earlier this morning during the panel about the dollarization. But the point here is that the public finance is essential, but it's not enough. So it's not about how many countries we have inside NDB, it's about how strong their markets are and how much able they are to use their local currency to incentivize investments in financial instruments denominated in their own local currencies, because this is what is going to reduce the need for USD-based funding, basically. So I bring this is part of the Kazan Declaration. It says, I'm sorry, for the Rio de Janeiro Declaration that says enhancing creditworthiness and lowering financing costs, improving the risk profile of strategic BRICS projects is the main purpose of this BRICS multilateral guarantees. We still do not have a date for launching this instrument, but it's probably going to happen in the near future. It's something that is incubated inside the NDB, so we already have the infrastructure for making the BRICS multilateral guarantees to work. Another important branch of this strategy is the new investment platform, which is designed to reduce the dependence on dollar-denominated finance as well. But now looking at how to produce sufficient volume of trade and investment, because again, the loans that the NDB are issuing in the bonds of the NDB are issuing, and the loans that the NDB is offering, they are not enough. They are not enough to produce the effect the BRICS countries need in terms of reducing the costs of the local currency. So it will only be possible by the private market. So, and we have to explore this kind of platform for new financing mechanisms. And it may be through fintech solutions, AI technologies, whatever. There is an estimative of USD 508 billion dollars for this kind of financing, which is 10 times NDB subscribed capital. So we have a sense of the need of the BRICS countries now in terms of operating in local currencies. Also, NIP would cover up to 10% of the total equity financing required. So we are talking about a very important profit for the BRICS countries, something around 1.5% in annual GDP, which would allow the BRICS countries to use their own currencies to finance the strategic projects that they want to. And also the new investment platform, as well as the BRICS guarantee mechanism, has the potential to develop the liquidity and the payment system that bypasses the dominant financial status quo, which is the dollar system, and facilitating inter-BRICS trade in local currencies. To conclude, I would like to say that NDB has a very solid and conservative approach, which is well known by the international financial architecture, and this is why the BRICS group chooses to launch a new NDB. But it is also very important tool in terms of transforming the political narrative of the BRICS back then in the 2008 crisis into institutional action. NDB has an agenda, a political agenda that is not a currency war, but it's not merely about vulnerability reduction. NDB's local currency tools are the most concrete and pragmatic pillars for building the BRICS development framework, and are also the best way to guarantee relative flexibility to pursue strategic investments in infrastructure and technology. Green financing is the official discourse, but we are talking here about, for example, financing artificial intelligence and the BRICS Pay, which is the platform for settlements and transferring currencies between BRICS countries. So this is not going to be funded by traditional international financial institutions. That's why BRICS need so much to be able to finance their strategic projects through NDB using their local currencies. GMB and NIP in risk reduction, they strengthen local capital markets, and they help BRICS building what we can see in the future as the new multipolar financial architecture. So this is what I would like to share with you today. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will be here for your questions.
Thank you so much, Taina, for your excellent presentation. I'm gonna check the questions. How do you think the expansion of the BRICS may increase or decrease the relevance of the group as a tool for de-dollarization? And is it possible to harmonize the interests of the financial interests of all this enormous group?
Yes, the expansion of the BRICS is inevitable, and despite the Brazilian chairmanship efforts to keep it under the radar, let's say, because of the Trump threats and everything. This aspect of the BRICS cooperation, the financial branch, was the most important one during the last summit. And this is because of the shared interest of the new BRICS countries in developing these kind of initiatives like the GMB, the NIP, and BRICS Pay, and others. They recognize that they need to strengthen their local markets, to strengthen their local currencies in order to be able to finance their strategic sectors without needing to bind to loans with the traditional international financial institutions. So it's not about who is inside, it's about what they need to do, and who is going to attach to the strategy or not. It depends on the capacity of the country itself. So what we can expect and what we will probably see is different rounds of BRICS members getting into the new initiatives in the globalization. Not all of them participating at the same time, not all of them agreeing about what to do, but progressively understanding how to be part of this new infrastructure that the BRICS are creating collectively.
Thank you so much. Now, our final panel will be, we will hear from Vivian Rocha. Vivian is a visiting professor of international relations at the Federal University of ABC, or UFABC, and PhD in international law at the University of São Paulo. And in this last lecture, we will return to the theme of sectoral cooperation, specifically in international trade, which is a very important tool for development. So Vivian is going to explain the promotion of development through the reduction of trade barriers, specifically in agri-food exports between BRICS countries, which is a very important area for Brazilian economy. Thank you. Vivian, you have the floor.
Well, good morning, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank Fabio Tomazella for me to this panel, and it's a pleasure to share the panel with these so high-profile colleagues here. And it's also a pleasure to meet here old friends as well, friends who made part of my academic journey here, like Ellen or even Fabio. So the topic of my presentation today is totally linked with the panel concerning the BRICS countries as platforms to achieve development, mainly the economic development here, in dissuading unjustifiable food safety barriers between BRIC countries, but it is possible to infer that it will also foster social development concerning fostering small and medium producers on agricultural genres as well. So, firstly, it is important to highlight the difference between food security and food safety. Food security is related to the physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So when we deal with food security, we are setting aside starvation, malnutrition, and access to food for individuals subject of national and international law. For its turn, food safety refers to the conditions and practices that ensure food will not cause harm to the consumer when it is prepared or eaten according to its intended use. So it is a scientific discipline describing the handling, preparation, and storage of food in ways that prevent foodborne illness. So it involves in international trade preventing contamination from biological, chemical, and physical hazards, proper handling and storage. In international food safety framework, it is provided by several means. In the WTO framework, firstly, particularly by the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement, the SPS agreement, which provides that this type of measure is lawful, but if it follows some assumptions, such as being justified by scientific basis, it was under a risk assessment process, or if there is no other kind of measure to be adopted to follow the legitimate purpose at stake, such as the safety of human beings and plants. They will have to be the less restricted than necessary to follow this purpose. There is also the Technical Barriers Agreement, the TBT agreement, that follows the same line, but one specificity that deserves to be mentioned here. It is the inclusion of the respect to sustainable environment in the preamble of the agreement. Despite the preamble is not a abiding part of an agreement, it has been used to support and add justifications of some restrictive measures based on environmental protections purposes. And it has been used not yet by BRICS countries, but by the EU in the EU Deforestation Act, for example, or in the CBAN initiative that will tax carbon leakage from imports outside the bloc. Moreover, there are some other rules also within the World Health Organization, such as the Codex Alimentarius and the World Organization for Animal Health, the OIE, for harmonization of national standards, and certainly it is important to mention the private standards as well, such as the halal certifications or other standards that will focus on food safety, certify that food safety is achieved when one country exports to another. Well, concerning the BRICS, although BRICS members conduct most of their trade with countries outside the group, some countries maintain great relationships with each other, including in agricultural field. In BRICS, the Brazilian main partner definitely is China, exporting $87 billion in 2021, followed by India with exporting $4.5 billion and United Arab Emirates with $2.3 billion, and finally Saudi Arabia with $2.1 billion. Well, among the most exported products here from Brazil to these countries are seeds and oil seeds, and meat preparations and sugar. However, along the years, it is possible to observe that the notifications by Brazil on trade barrier system conducted and sustained by the WTO, that if eliminated all these trade barriers, it could foster much more trade and much more this amount of trade than before. For example, there were some import restrictions based on food safety in the agricultural commerce between Brazil and China. In 2013, Brazil notified China about import restrictions on bovine meat, for example, in the SPS committee at the WTO, mainly concerning a focus on bovine spongiform encephalopathy, the BSE, on cattle. Brazil had provided detailed information on the unique case data and the implemented risk mitigation procedures to the OIE and all concerned WTO members, including China. The case had affected only one native cow, which had not entered the food or feed chain, and the OIE had maintained Brazil classification as a country with negligible risks for BSE. After some months of negotiation, providing further information, the Brazilian exports returned to normal. This was the first case that we can mention here of dissuading international trade barriers between the trade in the trade between China and Brazil. The second one could be mentioned, followed by one specific trade concern raised by the EU that Brazil had followed. Well, this is the most relevant concern addressed to the WTO in the last years, in the past 5 years, called China's actions related to COVID-19 that affect trade in food and agricultural products. Well, in line with the COVID-19 crisis, in 2020, during this crisis, China imposed import trade barriers, arguing that the contamination of agricultural packaging and the transmit of COVID was through the packaging of the food exports, the commodity exports. But it was not scientific proved. So it affected not only the Brazilian exports, but also all the whole world exports to China, because it was trade barrier imposed without a scientific justification, in violation of the SPS agreement at the WTO. It has affected Brazilian poultry meat imports that were suspended, and it returned some months of negotiation after that, but it was a very sensitive issue because of the absence of this scientific justification. Well, Brazil supported the concern from the EU at the WTO and underscored the relevance of the provision of the SPS agreement and the principle that the SPS measure should be based on scientific principles. And having observed that no other country nor the OIE had so far found scientific evidence for this restrictive approach to agricultural trade imposed by China, Brazil requested China to share this scientific evidence on which these measures were based. So this kind of trade barriers, it's an example that it will not worry not only states regarding the violation of the SPS agreement, but mainly producers, and mainly the Brazilian producers, because of the unpredictable requirements to test imported products and its packaging for COVID-19 genetic material. And at last, the sudden suspension of the products without this scientific basis. So these suspensions, by the way, are still happening to Australia, for example, according to a specific trade concerns raised in 2023. So it is possible to infer that the subjectivity of this Chinese barrier being dissuaded, maintained, according to the partner, it will be a very huge trade barrier here, and it's marked by its subjectivity at the expense of the rule of law, and arguing that there is no lesser measure to be adopted in line with this food safety provisions. So very quickly, in a very similar way, that happened to Brazilian meat exports to China, Brazil has faced import restrictions from Saudi Arabia regarding poultry exporting establishment in 2023. Brazil raised concerns against the country because Saudi authorities suddenly suspended imports from two Brazilian major poultry producing plants, both from the BRF plant, a very huge enterprise here in Brazil. One of them was responsible, for example, for over 20% of our poultry exports to Saudi Arabia. So it was very important to our economy. Considering that no clear technical grounds were provided by Saudi authorities, except for media reports or an investigation conducted by Brazil's federal policy, in the operation, a very famous operation called carne fraca, or with meat, until the last records in 2023, Saudi Arabia had not provided supporting documentation regarding the ongoing suspensions of the Brazilian exports. And even there is no specification of what type of sanitary issue could motivate this suspension of the establishment while allowing imports and consumptions of Brazilian poultry in Saudi Arabia. Well, these kinds of import restrictions against Brazil meat and poultry meat are often imposed as well by Indonesia, another recent BRICS members from 2007 to 2019. 4 times specific trade concerns were raised, and we had at the WTO, and we had a dispute at the dispute settlement body concerning these import restrictions based on since halal requirements to SPS restrictions. So these cases, after showing or presenting this general analysis of these 3 cases, it is possible to infer that the agricultural trade between Brazil and some other BRIC countries are marked by some first unjustified barriers to trade, imposed in violation of the main international frameworks here, and consist basically in the absence of scientific justification and risk analysis to justify these barriers, and undue delays and unpredictable and burden requirements to Brazilian exporters. Well, we have a new outlook here, despite we can see these main trade barriers imposed from these greatest Brazilian BRICS trade partners in meat and poultry meat. We could envisage now new kinds of imports that are unveiling the trade outlook here, mainly international trade from Brazil to China. And one product that deserves a highlight here is the Brazilian coffee, for example, that is achieving much more space than in the everyday of Chinese than before, especially with the launch of Luckin Coffee, a popular coffee shop and cafeteria in China that has been investing in the imports of the Brazilian coffee and even promoting a Brazilian coffee museum inside its facilities, which has been visited by the Vice President of Brazil, Geraldo Alckmin, last year. So the point here is that as the greatest coffee producer of the world, Brazil has obviously a great interest in the Chinese market and the absence of any import barriers to flourish its trade path here. And until now, the main import trade barriers are the need to comply with sanitary and labeling regulations, the accreditation of exporting companies with the General Administration of Customs of China, the GAC, and the logistical and delivery time challenges, which are greater for Brazil than for its closest competitions, such as Vietnam, for example. Well, in August 2025, China has authorized 183 new Brazilian coffee companies to export the product to the country, and since November 2023, 235 of such permits have been issued. Thus, with shipments to China increasing fivefold in the 5 years, as well as the authorization of coffee companies to export, it means that the new demand and a new open market could be capable to maintain not only the development of the large producers here, but also the small ones, what is connected to our topic of fostering development between BRICS countries here. So my conclusion is that to foster international trade and development between BRICS countries, the elimination of import barriers is a cornerstone. It will allow free trade without negligence, food safety, and also proceed with food security, since China, Saudi Arabia, or Indonesia do not produce at scale meat, poultry meat, or even coffee. Bilateral trade rules mainly must be followed to avoid an anarchical scenario of indiscriminate barriers within our cooperative initiative here called BRICS. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vivian. I think it's important to notice how BRICS proposes a new model of development that aims to go beyond mere economic growth, promoting more equitable, resilient, and inclusive progress that challenges the traditional north-south core periphery dynamics. But in reality, much has to be done. There are differing national interests, and of course, this is not easy to achieve. So the proposal for a multipolar and cooperative international system is complex and long-term. Thank you so much for your participation here, and it was great to be with you today. And thank you, the audience, for being here until the time of lunch. Thank you. Bye.